They called me the perfect wife. I gave him my kidney, my very life force, believing I was securing our forever, but as I lay in that sterile hospital bed, my body still singing with surgical pain, I heard them. Whispers, insidious and cold, speaking of plots to steal my daughter, my harmony, my everything, my perfect life. It wasn't just a lie. It was a meticulously crafted stage, and the curtain was about to fall. They were about to learn what happens when you cross a mother. For years that stage had shimmered with domestic bliss, carefully constructed on a foundation of shared dreams and what I thought was unwavering trust. Our home on Willowbrook Drive, a cozy haven with its charming, slightly creaky porch, and a sprawling oak in the front yard, whose leaves whispered secrets with the wind, was a testament to the life Cyrus and I had built. Inside, it was a canvas reflecting my creative touch. Warm, inviting, filled with Harmony's artwork taped proudly on the fridge, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. He, Cyrus Simon, with his sharp suits and an even sharper mind, was the undeniable pillar of our small world. A successful real estate developer, he moved through life with an air of quiet confidence, a man admired by all, and adored by me, his biggest champion. And then there was Harmony, our daughter, with her bright, inquisitive eyes that missed nothing, and a laugh that could chase away any shadow. She was the sun, moon, and stars in our universe, the living embodiment of the unconditional love I believed Cyrus and I shared. My own work as a freelance graphic designer, creating vibrant logos and engaging brand identities from my sunlit home office overlooking the garden, allowed me the treasured flexibility to always be there for her, for them. It was a life balanced perfectly, a symphony of purpose and joy, where every day felt like a gentle rhythmic hum. Cyrus never tired of telling me I was his rock, his anchor, the very core of his existence. He'd often say, with a hand clasped over mine at dinner or a gentle kiss on my forehead before bed, "Amanda, you are the most selfless woman I know, my perfect wife, my brilliant designer, the best mother Harmony could ever dream of." His words, always so effusive, always so perfectly timed, were like warm honey, coating any lingering doubt or tiny inconvenient thought. Sometimes, a fleeting unease would prick at me. Was anyone truly times that times perfect? Could anyone genuinely be times that times selfless without a hidden agenda? But I'd quickly dismiss it, attributing it to my own insecurities, basking instead in the unwavering glow of his admiration. I convinced myself that our love was simply that profound, that extraordinary, that deeply connected. He made me believe it. He made me believe we were unbreakable. Our future an endless, sunlit path. Our future, an endless, sunlit path, I'd believed, until the shadows arrived, not as a gradual dusk, but as a sudden, brutal eclipse. It began subtly. A vague fatigue Cyrus brushed off as the demands of his thriving real estate business, then progressed to a worrying pallor and a persistent cough that lingered long past the typical cold. The initial doctor's visits yielded nothing conclusive, only a growing knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Each reassessment, each new test, felt like a slow-motion descent into an unknown abyss. Then came the phone call, the one that splintered our perfect world into 1,000 irreparable shards. "Mrs. Simon," Dr. Howard's voice, usually so calm and measured, was laced with an uncharacteristic gravity that chilled me to the bone. "We have the results from Mr. Simon's latest tests. I'm afraid it's not good. He has end-stage chronic kidney disease. His kidneys are failing. He needs a transplant. And he needs it soon." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy, draining the color from my world. Cyrus, vibrant, strong Cyrus, dying? It was unthinkable, a grotesque distortion of the future we had so meticulously planned. My mind raced, not with fear for myself, but with a visceral, primal need to save him, to somehow pull him back from the brink. "I'll do it," I heard myself say, the words firm, unwavering, Before Dr. Howard could even finish explaining the severity or the complexities of a transplant. "I'll give him my kidney." There was no hesitation, no debate, only an instinctive surge of love and commitment that overrode all logic, all fear. He was my husband, the father of my child, and I would tear out a piece of my very soul if it meant keeping him alive. Cyrus, pale and shaken, looked at me across the living room with what I believed was profound gratitude, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. "My selfless Amanda," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "my perfect wife." Those words, once my deepest comfort, now echo with a chilling irony I couldn't possibly comprehend then. I just wanted him to live. The following weeks blurred into a dizzying whirlwind of medical appointments. A relentless gauntlet of compatibility tests, blood draws, tissue typing, and endless forms detailing risks and consent. Each procedure was a stark reminder of the fragile line between life and death, a constant echo of the stakes involved. There were psychological evaluations too, probing into my mental fortitude, my understanding of the monumental risks, my true motivations. "Are you absolutely certain, Mrs. Simon?" the kind-faced psychiatrist, Dr. Wells, asked, her gaze gentle but piercing. "This is a major surgery. It's a significant sacrifice, and your life will be irrevocably changed." "I am certain," I'd replied, my voice steady, my conviction absolute. My only fear was not being a match, not being able to save him, not being able to bring back the man I loved. Every night, I would hold Harmony close, tracing the curve of her cheek, imagining a future where Cyrus was healthy again, where our family unit was restored, complete. This surgery wasn't just about saving Cyrus. It was about preserving our sunlit path, about keeping our world whole. The days leading up to the surgery were a strange, poignant blend of profound anxiety and unyielding hope. I meticulously prepared everything for Harmony, making sure her routine would remain as undisturbed as possible, recording bedtime stories for her, labeling snacks in the fridge, writing down instructions for Mrs. Cooper, who had graciously offered to help. I walked through our Willowbrook home, touching familiar objects, the worn spine of a favorite book, the cool surface of the kitchen counter, the soft fabric of Harmony's blanket imprinting them on my memory, a silent promise that I would return, whole and strong, for my daughter. Cyrus was attentive during this period, his touch gentle, his words reassuring. He spoke of the future, of trips we'd finally take, of growing old together in our creaky house, painting vivid pictures that solidified my belief that this sacrifice was the ultimate act of love, forging an unbreakable bond between us. I envisioned myself waking up, the pain a small price to pay for the overwhelming joy of seeing him recover, of knowing I had given him the gift of life. I was ready to face the knife, to endure the pain, to give everything, because I loved him. And I believed he loved me, just as fiercely in return. I believed I was saving our time's future, not merely his. The searing pain was the first thing to greet me, a hot, insistent throb in my side, a constant reminder of the piece of myself I had given away. When I finally drifted back to full consciousness, the bright, sterile lights of the recovery room were a jarring contrast to the soft future I had envisioned. My throat was parched, my head foggy with anesthetics, but a more acute ache settled in when I realized the empty space beside my bed. Cyrus wasn't there. Not a single rose, not a handwritten note, just the impersonal hum of hospital machinery and the distant chatter of nurses. Confusion, thick and disorienting, mingled with a faint whisper of unease. He should have been here. Promised times he would be. The days that followed were a blur of discomfort and a growing, gnawing question mark. My parents, of course, were a constant worried presence, their faces etched with concern. But the Simons were notably absent. Finally, on the third day, Catherine and Murphy breezed in. Catherine, immaculately dressed as always, offered a perfunctory smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Amanda, you're looking recovered," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. Murphy, equally stiff, nodded curtly. They stayed for perhaps 5 minutes, asking superficial questions about my pain levels, never once mentioning Cyrus or his recovery. There was no touch. No genuine empathy. Just a cold, almost clinical observation. "We'll be off then?" Catherine announced, glancing at her watch. "Lots to do." They left as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind a chill that felt colder than the air conditioning. I brushed it off, telling myself they were simply overwhelmed, focused on Cyrus's recovery, but the image of their stiff, unfeeling faces replayed in my mind. It was later that afternoon, when a kind, older nurse named Evelyn came to adjust my IV, that the first crack truly appeared in my carefully constructed reality. "You know, Mrs. Simon?" she said, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. Mr. Simon was up and about surprisingly quickly. We rarely see transplant recipients so spry. I saw him just yesterday morning, in the cafeteria with a very young, very pretty woman. Blonde. Lovely smile. His sister, perhaps? No, she had a different sort of energy. She paused, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. They seemed quite close. My breath hitched. A young, beautiful woman? Cyrus was supposed to be recovering, resting, not cavorting in the cafeteria with mysterious blondes. My immediate reaction was to rationalize, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. A distant relative. A business associate. But Evelyn's words, different sort of energy, gnawed at me, planting a tiny, icy seed of suspicion. The exhaustion and pain made it easy to push it down. But it lingered. A faint, discordant note in the symphony of my recovery. My discharge from the hospital a few days later was unceremonious. My parents picked me up, their worry evident in their quiet efficiency. As we drove back to Willowbrook Drive, my home, the familiar landscape felt foreign, muted. Stepping inside, the silence was deafening, a palpable vacuum where the warmth of our family life used to be. The lingering scent of coffee and Harmony's faint crayon drawings on the fridge felt like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I expected Cyrus to be there, perhaps not waiting at the door, but at least a sign of his presence. A card, a welcome home. There was nothing, just an oppressive, heavy stillness that settled over me, a chilling sense of wrongness that permeated every corner of our once vibrant home. It was not the homecoming I had imagined. It was a cold, empty void. The answer to Cyrus's absence arrived 2 days later, not from him, but from Catherine. She arrived unannounced, her expression strangely triumphant, a stark contrast to her previous visit. "Amanda," she began, without preamble. "Cyrus is recovering remarkably well at the family estate. The quiet, the dedicated staff, it's ideal for him." My heart sank. The family estate? Not with me? Not in our home? "And you, my dear," she continued, her gaze sweeping over me with an almost clinical disdain. "You're looking rather pale and thin. The surgery was quite invasive, wasn't it?" She made it sound like a personal failing. Cyrus needs stability, a strong partner, someone who isn't, well, damaged. The word hung in the air, a venomous dart. "And honestly, Amanda, you're clearly no longer suitable. Not for him, not for the rigors of our family, and certainly not for bearing more children." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "The Simon legacy requires strength, Amanda, and you, my dear, have proven quite times weak." Each word was a calculated blow, delivered with chilling precision. My blood ran cold. Damaged? Unsuitable? Weak? Asterisk. For a moment, I was speechless, utterly stunned by the brutal audacity, the sheer cruelty of her pronouncement, the kind nurse's words, the in-laws' previous coldness. The haunting silence of my home, it all coalesced into a horrifying, dawning realization. This wasn't just about Cyrus's recovery. This was a deliberate, premeditated assault. My perfect life, my selfless sacrifice, had been twisted into a weapon against me, and in that moment, as the bitter truth began to crystallize, a cold, hard resolve began to form. Pushing aside the pain and confusion, they had made their move. Now, it was my turn. Instead of just waiting for more revelations, my resolve spurred me into action. I couldn't simply sit in the chilling silence of my home, nursing the wounds of Catherine's pronouncements. I needed proof, solid and undeniable, to confirm the gnawing suspicion that had taken root. The nurse's casual comment, Catherine's cruel words, they were fragments of a terrifying mosaic I was compelled to complete. My heart, still tender from surgery and reeling from the emotional blows, hardened with a fierce determination. I would find Cyrus. And I would find the truth. The first step was to learn where Cyrus was supposedly recovering. A subtle call to Mrs. Cooper, framed as concern for his well-being, yielded the address of the Simon family estate. A sprawling, gated property miles across town. It was a place I had visited countless times. But now it felt like enemy territory. I told my parents I was going for a drive, needing fresh air, and left Harmony playing contentedly with her new art supplies. The drive was a blur of heightened senses, every turn of the wheel a testament to my burgeoning courage, or perhaps, my impending heartbreak. I parked my car a discreet distance from the estate gates, obscured by a line of mature maples. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. For what felt like an eternity, I watched, my breath held captive in my chest. Then, the wrought iron gates swung open, a sleek black luxury sedan glided out, and my blood ran cold. It was Cyrus's car, unmistakable. And in the passenger seat, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light, was the young beautiful woman Evelyn had described. Heather Stewart. My stomach clenched, a sickening lurch that felt far worse than any surgical pain. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic scene, just the stark, brutal reality of it. They were laughing, heads close together, her hand resting casually on his arm as he pulled away from the estate. A wave of nausea washed over me, a physical manifestation of the crushing blow to my carefully constructed world. My perfect life wasn't merely flawed. It was a meticulously constructed illusion, a cruel joke played at my expense. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, carving a chasm through my very soul. He had accepted my kidney, my life force, while simultaneously weaving this web of deceit with another woman. It wasn't just an affair, it was an act of profound disrespect, a calculated obliteration of every vow, every shared dream, every loving touch. For a long moment I could only sit there, paralyzed by the enormity of what I had witnessed. Grief, raw and agonizing, surged through me, bringing with it a searing, unadulterated rage. How could he? How times dared times he? The man I had loved, the man I had saved, was a stranger, a monster hidden behind a mask of charm and affection. My heart screamed in denial, trying to reconcile the image of the loving husband with the deceitful stranger I had just seen. A part of me, a small foolish part, still yearned for an explanation, a rationalization, anything that could undo this gut-wrenching truth. But the images were undeniable. The love I thought we shared felt like a bitter mockery, but beneath the tidal wave of pain, a new emotion began to simmer. A burning, protective fire. Harmony. My sweet, innocent Harmony. She was all that mattered now. This man, this deceiver, could not be allowed to poison her world, to take her from me. My fierce resolve, ignited by Catherine's words, now blazed into an inferno. The love I had for Cyrus was dead, replaced by a cold, strategic fury focused solely on protecting my child. I drove home on autopilot, the familiar route, now a pathway to a future irrevocably altered. The images of Cyrus and Heather, so carefree, so intimate, replayed relentlessly in my mind, each frame a fresh wound. But as I pulled into my driveway, the sight of Harmony's brightly colored drawing taped to the front door, a stick-figure family, me, her, and Cyrus, brought a stark clarity. The love I felt for him, the lingering hope for reconciliation, evaporated, replaced by a cold, strategic fury. The facade was shattered, yes, but I was not. I was a mother, and I would fight. My quiet investigation began then, Not with frantic calls or desperate pleas, but with a methodical, almost detached intensity. I started with the most accessible tools. Online public records, social media carefully, subtly, and even old photo albums for any forgotten faces. Who was Heather Stewart? How long had this been going on? What other lies had Cyrus told? Each click, each search, was a painful step deeper into the rabbit hole of his deception. I needed to understand the scope of his treachery, to piece together the blueprint of his betrayal. Not just for myself, but for Harmony's future. The initial shock gave way to a dawning sense of empowerment. An understanding that knowledge, however painful, was power. I would learn everything. And then, I would make them pay. My quiet investigation quickly proved to be a lonely, terrifying endeavor. The initial surge of anger had dulled to a cold dread, a heavy cloak that threatened to smother me. I needed more than just online searches and gut feelings. I needed eyes, ears, and perhaps a confidant. My gaze kept returning to the charming, slightly overgrown garden of Mrs. Cooper, our next-door neighbor. She was a widow, a retired schoolteacher, with a reputation for both discretion and an uncanny ability to notice everything happening on Willowbrook Drive. She had been invaluable with Harmony during my surgery. A gentle, comforting presence. Perhaps she could be more. One afternoon, feigning a need for gardening advice, I knocked on her door. Over cups of herbal tea and the scent of lavender, I carefully, delicately, began to unspool the thread of my suspicions. I started with Cyrus's prolonged absence, Catherine's cruel remarks, and then, hesitantly, the nurse's comment. Mrs. Cooper listened, her wise, crinkled eyes never leaving my face. When I finally whispered the name Heather Stewart and described the blonde woman I'd seen with Cyrus, a flicker of recognition, then concern, crossed her face. "Oh, dear Amanda," she sighed, placing a reassuring hand over mine. "I had hoped I was wrong. I've seen them, you know. Not here, of course, but around town. At the farmer's market, a few times leaving that new upscale restaurant on Elm. Always so affectionate." Her voice was gentle, but the words were a blow. "It's been going on for a while, I'm afraid. Since before your surgery, I would guess. I didn't want to believe it. Not after what you did for him." The confirmation, though painful, was also a strange form of relief. I wasn't imagining it. The affair wasn't a sudden lapse. It was a sustained, calculated deception, stretching back months, perhaps even longer. Mrs. Cooper, with her network of local gossip and sharp observations, became my first, unexpected, and utterly invaluable ally. She confirmed Heather Stewart was indeed a young real estate agent from a prominent, if somewhat flashy, local family. Just as I was beginning to process the sickening timeline of Cyrus's treachery, the legal papers arrived. A thick envelope, bearing the embossed logo of Simon and Associates Law. My hands trembled as I opened it. Cyrus was filing for divorce. But it wasn't just a divorce filing. It was a brutal, insidious attack. He was seeking full custody of Harmony. The documents painted a horrifying portrait of me. An emotionally unstable post-operative wreck, prone to irrational outbursts, incapable of providing a stable home for our daughter. There were vague, unsubstantiated claims of my declining mental health and unpredictable behavior since the transplant. The words were a venomous assault, designed to strip me of everything I held dear, to invalidate my very sanity. The paper itself felt like it burned my fingertips, each fabricated accusation a fresh wound. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm me. My immediate visceral instinct was to protect Harmony. This wasn't just about my broken heart. It was about her future. I had to fight. But how? Where did I even begin? I spent sleepless nights researching family law attorneys, sifting through online reviews, asking hushed questions of Mrs. Cooper's more legally inclined acquaintances. The process felt overwhelming. A dizzying maze of legal jargon and intimidating fees. My freelance income suddenly seemed pitifully inadequate for the war ahead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of despair, a name surfaced consistently. Reed, a family law attorney known for his sharp mind and compassionate, yet relentless approach. His office was surprisingly modest, tucked away above a bustling cafe, a stark contrast to the grand, imposing architecture of Simon and Associates. He was a man of quiet intensity, with kind eyes that seemed to absorb my entire frantic story without judgment. I laid out everything: my sacrifice, Cyrus's affair, Catherine's cruel words, Mrs. Cooper's observations, and now, these devastating legal documents. Reed listened patiently, his pen scratching notes on a legal pad. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "Mrs. Simon?" he finally said, his voice calm. "This is a deeply troubling case. Mr. Simon's tactics are aggressive, and frankly, despicable." He then explained the concept of litigation by attrition, a tactic where one party attempts to wear down the other financially and emotionally, with a barrage of legal filings and accusations. "They are trying to paint you as unfit, to exploit your vulnerability after surgery," he continued, his jaw tightening. "And the custody filing? That is a calculated move to gain leverage, to break you." The full, horrifying depth of Cyrus's manipulation began to crystallize in that moment. It wasn't just an affair, or a callous disregard for my sacrifice. It was a meticulously planned campaign to erase me from Harmony's life, to rewrite our history, and to seize everything. The man I had loved, the man whose life I had saved, was not just a betrayer, but a cold, calculating strategist, intent on my utter destruction. The initial shock was profound, leaving me breathless with the realization of his malice. This wasn't just about a divorce. It was a battle for my dignity, my sanity, and most importantly, my daughter. Reed's steadfast gaze met mine, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, but a quiet, unwavering resolve that mirrored my own. We would fight. Reed's steadfast gaze met mine, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, but a quiet, unwavering resolve that mirrored my own. We would fight. That promise, a silent vow exchanged between us, propelled us into the next phase. While Reed's team meticulously sifted through every public record, every financial statement, every scrap of information related to Cyrus and Heather, I retreated into the quiet solace of my home, trying to regain my strength, both physical and emotional. I was trying to piece together a new sense of normalcy for Harmony, reading her bedtime stories with a voice steadier than my heart felt, baking her favorite cookies with hands that still occasionally trembled. The legal battle was a distant hum, a storm gathering on the horizon, but I trusted Reed. I had to. Then, 3 weeks after our initial meeting, the phone rang. It was Reed, his voice taut with a controlled excitement I hadn't heard before. "Amanda," he began, "I need you to come to my office. Immediately. We just found something that changes everything." My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden frantic drum. What could possibly be worse than what I already knew? When I arrived, breathless and trembling, Reed pushed a file across his desk. Inside were 2 documents, placed side by side. One was my marriage certificate to Cyrus. The other, dated just 2 weeks' times before time Cyrus had even filed for divorce from me, was a marriage certificate for Cyrus Simon and Heather Stewart, quietly filed in a neighboring state. Bigamy, the word echoed in the silent office, a thunderclap in my shattered world. My gaze flickered between the 2 pieces of paper, my mind struggling to reconcile the sheer audacity, the unbelievable arrogance. He hadn't waited. He hadn't even pretended to respect the legal process. Or me. He had simply married her. While still legally married to me, for a long moment, I felt a familiar wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of being utterly outmaneuvered. But then, as Reed began to speak, explaining the legal implications, the criminal charges, the undeniable proof of his deception, a different sensation began to blossom within me. It wasn't triumph. Not yet, but a cold, strategic clarity. This wasn't just another betrayal. This was a weapon. A powerful, undeniable weapon handed to me on a silver platter. My role shifted, instantly, irrevocably. I was no longer merely a victim reeling from a broken heart. I was a strategist, armed with a truth so damning it could bring down everything they had meticulously built. This, Reed said, tapping the second certificate, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction, changes the entire landscape. We will file a comprehensive legal response, alleging not just fraud and emotional distress, but also bigamy. We'll immediately notify the district attorney's office and the state bar. This is a criminal offense, Amanda. And it will also initiate an ethical investigation into his professional conduct as a real estate developer. Cyrus Simon's reputation, his entire career, is now on the line. The plan was audacious, aggressive, and utterly necessary. We moved quickly. Reed's office prepared the filings with a speed that mirrored my own burning resolve. Within days, the amended divorce petition, detailing Cyrus's bigamy and the associated criminal allegations, hit the courthouse. It was a bombshell. The local media, already keenly following the story of the kidney donor wife, abandoned for a younger woman, seized upon the new development with ravenous intensity. Headlines screamed, "Wife sacrifice met with bigamy. Real estate mogul faces criminal charges after second marriage." Suddenly, the narrative shifted entirely. I was no longer just the unstable ex-wife Cyrus sought to discard. I was a symbol of profound betrayal, a wronged woman who had given a part of herself for a man who had not only cheated but also committed a felony. Public sympathy, once a trickle, became a flood. My phone, previously silent save for my parents and Mrs. Cooper, began to ring off the hook with messages of support from strangers, from women's advocacy groups, from people who saw their own experiences of betrayal reflected in mine. Social media buzzed with outrage, condemning Cyrus and Heather, and demanding justice for me and Harmony. This wave of public outrage was a powerful ally, amplifying our legal offensive. Reed leveraged it brilliantly, ensuring every new development, every legal filing, was strategically communicated. The criminal investigation into Cyrus's bigamy was formally launched, followed swiftly by an ethical review by the State Real Estate Board. The Simon name, once synonymous with respectability and wealth, was now being dragged through the mud of public scandal. I watched it unfold, not with joy, but with a grim satisfaction. They had chosen to play a dirty game, to use my sacrifice against me. Now, the truth, stark and undeniable, was turning their own weapons back on them. The curtain, as I had once thought, was indeed falling, but it was falling on their time stage, not mine. The stage was indeed theirs, but the spotlight was shifting, harsh and unforgiving, onto the dark corners of their deceit. It wasn't long before the official investigations, propelled by Reed's relentless pursuit and the public's outrage, brought a new, formidable figure into my fractured world. Detective Ray Torres. He was a man of quiet intensity, with a gaze that seemed to peel back layers of pretense, and a reputation for unearthing truths, no matter how deeply buried. Our first meeting was in Reed's office, the air thick with unspoken urgency. Torres didn't mince words. "Mrs. Simon," he began, his voice a low rumble, "the bigamy charge opened a lot of doors. We've been looking into Mr. Simon's activities, and what we're finding is far more extensive than simple marital infidelity." His next words landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. "We've reviewed Cyrus Simon's medical records more thoroughly than he might have anticipated, specifically looking at his previous health checkups. Mrs. Simon, our findings indicate that your husband was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, not a few months before your surgery, but over a year prior. He knew the extent of his illness and the impending need for a transplant long before he ever told you." The world tilted. My selfless act, my desperate rush to save the man I loved, was not born of urgent crisis but calculated manipulation. He had known. He had watched me go through the arduous tests, the psychological evaluations, the physical and emotional preparation, all while harboring this secret. He had let me believe I was a hero, a savior, when in reality, I was a perfectly compatible, conveniently available, and utterly expendable resource. The chilling irony of his whispered words, "My selfless Amanda, my perfect wife," now echoed as a grotesque taunt. My very body, a piece of my life force, had been a pawn in his monstrous game. My sacrifice wasn't a testament to love, it was a cold, clinical transaction, Torres continued, his voice unwavering, painting a picture that twisted the knife deeper. Furthermore, the timeline of his affair with Heather Stewart isn't just months as initially reported. Our investigation suggests it predates your husband's disclosure of his illness to you. It was well underway, deeply entwined with his knowledge of his condition. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a sustained relationship that ran parallel to his long-term planning for his declining health and his exit strategy from your marriage. The revelations came in rapid succession, each more sickening than the last. The Financial Crimes Unit, brought in due to the ethical investigation into Cyrus's real estate dealings, had uncovered a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It appears Mr. Simon has been systematically siphoning funds and concealing assets for at least 2 years, Torres explained, gesturing to a stack of complex financial documents, and much of this activity is linked to his new father-in-law, Stuart Stewart. Stewart's real estate empire, while outwardly legitimate, has strong ties to a network of illicit land deals, money laundering, and even allegations of bribery. My breath hitched. Heather's father. This wasn't just Cyrus's betrayal. It was a grander, darker conspiracy. A family enterprise built on deceit and greed. My life, my health, my love. They weren't just the casualties of a broken marriage, but carefully chosen instruments in a much larger, more nefarious game. I had been a prop on their stage, a tool to secure Cyrus's future, a stepping stone for his illicit ambitions with a family as morally bankrupt as he was. The horrifying realization was that I was never loved, never truly seen. I was merely an asset, to be exploited, discarded, and then, if they had their way, utterly erased. The warmth of our Willowbrook home, the laughter with Harmony, the intimate whispers with Cyrus, it had all been a meticulously constructed illusion, designed to keep me compliant, oblivious, and perfectly positioned for his ultimate betrayal. The man I had married, the man I had saved, was a stranger more terrifying than any fictional villain. And I, his unsuspecting victim, was now staring into the abyss of his calculated cruelty. The abyss, I soon learned, was not a static void but a churning vortex, actively seeking to devour me whole. The revelations from Detective Torres had barely settled when the next legal volley struck. A precise and insidious assault aimed at the very heart of my existence. Harmony. This time, it wasn't Cyrus leading the charge. At least not openly. The papers, delivered by a solemn court officer, bore Heather Stewart's name. She was petitioning for a temporary restraining order against me, citing unstable and erratic behavior, and a demonstrable risk to the well-being of a minor child, namely Harmony. The accompanying documents were a grotesque echo of Cyrus's initial divorce filing, but now amplified and seemingly substantiated. They presented what they claimed were psychological reports, thinly disguised as professional assessments, painting a picture of a woman spiraling into mental instability after her surgery and the trauma of her divorce. These reports, clearly fabricated, detailed exaggerated accounts of my grief, twisted my protective instincts into paranoia, and even suggested I was suffering from a delusional disorder, all designed to portray me as a danger to my own daughter. The audacity was breathtaking, the cruelty beyond anything I had yet encountered. They weren't just trying to take Harmony, they were trying to invalidate my very sanity, to strip me of my credibility as a mother and a human being. The goal was transparent: to remove Harmony from my care. Leveraging these fraudulent claims to justify their actions, fury, cold and crystalline, replaced the initial shock. they would not break me. Reed, his face grim, quickly scheduled a meeting with Dr. Patricia Wells, a highly respected clinical psychologist, known for her ethical rigor. My struggle began anew, not in the surgical ward, but in sterile testing rooms, answering countless questions, undergoing extensive evaluations to prove what I already knew. I was a loving, capable mother, perfectly sane and fit to raise my daughter. Each session felt like an interrogation, each question a fresh wound reopening the trauma they had inflicted. But I endured it, focusing on Harmony's face, on her bright laugh, on the future I was fighting to protect. Reed assured me that Dr. Wells's reports would stand as an undeniable counter to their lies, but their machinations moved faster than our counter-offensive. Before Dr. Wells's comprehensive assessment could be submitted to the court, an emergency hearing was called. Fueled by the urgency of Heather's fabricated claims and Cyrus's insidious influence, the judge, swayed by the seemingly credible though false evidence of my supposed instability, made a decision that ripped my world apart. A temporary custody order was issued. Harmony was to be removed from my care immediately and placed with Catherine and Murphy Simon until a full custody hearing could be arranged. The moment they took Harmony was the darkest hour of my life. Her small hand, usually so warm and confident in mine, trembled as a social worker gently led her away. Her eyes, wide and confused, searched mine for an explanation I couldn't provide, a reassurance I couldn't give. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, echoing the shattering of my heart. I reached for her, but Catherine, with a triumphant smirk, stepped between us. Murphy stood by, his face impassive, watching Harmony disappear into their car. Into the cold, calculating embrace of her grandparents was a despair so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. The silence of my home, once merely chilling, now screamed with her absence. The pain of the physical wound I bore for Cyrus was nothing compared to the agony of her loss. I curled up on her bed, burying my face in her teddy bear, inhaling the faint scent of her shampoo, and wept until there were no more tears left. But even in the deepest trough of that despair, a spark remained, a tiny ember of defiance that refused to be extinguished. They thought this would break me, that they could exploit my pain and sacrifice to steal my child. They were wrong. The temporary loss of Harmony didn't diminish my resolve. It forged it into something harder, sharper, an unyielding weapon. This setback, brutal as it was, only fueled my determination. I would expose every lie, every conspirator, every dark secret. I would dismantle their entire rotten empire piece by piece. Harmony was my North Star, and I would navigate through this darkness, no matter the cost, to bring her home. They had ignited a fire in a mother's heart, and now they would learn the true meaning of a woman scorned. The agony of Harmony's absence was a constant searing pain, but it no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it became the fuel for my resolve. A cold furnace driving me forward with a clarity I hadn't possessed before. Reed, witnessing my unyielding determination, quickly mobilized our resources, and Dr. Patricia Wells became my beacon in the psychological labyrinth they had created. Dr. Wells, a woman with a formidable intellect and an unwavering ethical compass, approached the task of dismantling the fraudulent reports with surgical precision. She pored over every page, every word of the fabricated psychological assessments Cyrus and Heather had used against me. Her office, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, became a war room filled with dense medical journals and highlighted legal documents. She painstakingly identified the inconsistencies, the manipulated data, the jargon misused and misapplied, demonstrating beyond a shadow of a doubt that the reports were not merely flawed, but maliciously manufactured. Her expert testimony, detailed and irrefutable, systematically exposed Dr. Fisher's methods as unethical, unscientific, and utterly baseless. She highlighted the telltale signs of a rushed, predetermined conclusion, rather than a genuine diagnostic process. As Dr. Wells worked to clear my name on the psychological front, Detective Torres's broader investigation continued to yield devastating results against Stewart's criminal network. The threads of Cyrus's deceit, financial misdealings, and now, the fabricated evidence, all seemed to converge back to Heather's father. It was through this wider net that Dr. Fisher, the very architect of my psychological torment, was finally ensnared. Torres, a man of few words but sharp actions, apprehended Fisher as he attempted to flee the country, discovering a trove of incriminating documents that linked him directly to Stewart and the Simon family's scheme to discredit me. His arrest was a profound victory, not just for my case, but for every other victim of Stewart's ruthless enterprise. It sent a tremor through their carefully constructed empire of lies. The pressure mounted, relentless and suffocating, on every member of their conspiracy. The media, already ravenous for updates, published news of Dr. Fisher's arrest, further tainting the Simon name. It was during a particularly grueling round of depositions, a session designed by Reed to chip away at their collective facade, that the breakthrough finally came. Catherine Simon, usually so composed, so impervious, began to crack. Under Reed's relentless, precise questioning about the funding of Dr. Fisher's evaluations and the precise timeline of payments, her veneer of aristocratic disdain began to crumble. Her answers became evasive, then contradictory. And finally, under the threat of perjury charges and her own impending legal peril, she broke. With a gasp that seemed to carry the weight of years of carefully maintained appearances, she confessed. Her voice, thin and reedy, admitted to financing the fake evidence against me, driven by her own misguided loyalty to Cyrus and her desperate desire to protect the Simon family's reputation and legacy, which she believed I threatened. Her confession was a seismic shock, directly implicating herself and providing undeniable proof of the conspiracy. Reed wasted no time. With Dr. Wells's conclusive reports, Dr. Fisher's arrest, and Catherine's damning confession in hand, he immediately petitioned the court for an emergency hearing. The judge, whose initial decision had torn Harmony from my arms, now listened with an expression of increasing gravity as the full scope of the elaborate deception was laid bare. There was no room for doubt. The evidence of their malicious fabrication was overwhelming. In a swift, decisive ruling, the temporary custody order was reversed. My name was cleared. The judge, his voice tinged with a rare note of apology, ordered Harmony's immediate return to my care. The call came through Reed's office. A moment I would forever cherish. "They're bringing her home, Amanda," he said, a quiet triumph in his voice. I rushed back to Willowbrook Drive, my heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and an almost unbearable anticipation. When the social worker's car pulled into my driveway, bringing with it Harmony, my world finally righted itself. She emerged slowly, her little face pale but her eyes lighting up the moment she saw me. "Mommy," she cried, a pure, joyous sound that obliterated all the recent pain. I knelt, my arms wide open, and she launched herself into them, burying her face in my shoulder. Her small body felt so fragile, yet so incredibly strong against mine. I held her tight, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of her hair, whispering promises of safety and forever. Tears, not of sorrow but of profound, overwhelming relief, streamed down my face. It was a small victory, yes, but after the darkness, it felt like the sun itself had finally broken through the clouds. My daughter was home. The battle was far from over, but with Harmony back in my arms, I knew I could face anything. The warmth of Harmony in my arms was the only solace I needed. A profound joy that, for a precious few days, allowed me to believe the worst was behind us. But even that delicate peace could not erase the dark currents still swirling beneath the surface. The fight was far from over, and I had foolishly believed I had already faced the deepest trenches of Cyrus's depravity. I was wrong. The phone call came a few days later. A quiet afternoon when Harmony was napping, her sweet face finally free of the shadows of fear. It was Detective Torres, his voice grave, asking me to meet him and read at the district attorney's office. A new development, he'd said, one he felt I needed to hear in person. My stomach clenched with a familiar premonition of dread. A sickening certainty that another layer of their monstrous deception was about to be peeled back. The meeting room was stark, the silence heavy as Torres began to speak, his gaze fixed on mine. "Mrs. Simon," he started. "Our investigation into Stuart Stewart and the wider network has uncovered further information regarding Cyrus's medical history, specifically, the compatibility testing performed for his transplant." He paused, and Reed shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You weren't the only compatible donor identified, Amanda." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Torres's eyes hardened. Heather Stewart was also a compatible kidney donor for Cyrus Simon. A perfect match by all medical standards. The air left my lungs in a rush. A silent scream trapped in my throat. Heather? The woman he cheated with? The woman he committed bigamy for? The woman who conspired to steal my child? She was a match. The realization hit me like a physical blow, worse than any pain from the surgery. But it wasn't just that she was a match. The implications were far, far more sinister. And she refused. Reed finished, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "We found records. Confidential medical notes from Dr. Howard's office. Heather Stewart declined to donate, citing personal inconvenience and concerns about a surgical scar impacting her modeling aspirations. Modeling aspirations." The words echoed in my head. A grotesque parody of human compassion. She had chosen vanity over his life, over the man she supposedly loved. But the true horror, the ultimate betrayal, was yet to come. Torres leaned forward, his voice a low, chilling rumble. "Here's the part you need to understand, Amanda. Cyrus Simon was fully aware of Heather Stewart's compatibility and her subsequent refusal. He knew she wouldn't donate. He then allowed you, his unsuspecting wife, to undergo a major, life-altering surgery. He actively orchestrated for you to sacrifice your organ, your health, your body, when another viable option, one he was intimately involved with, had already been explored and rejected. The world spun on its axis, every carefully constructed truth about Cyrus shattering into a million poisoned shards. It wasn't just that he cheated. It wasn't just the bigamy. It wasn't just the lies, the manipulation, the attempts to steal harmony. This was the pinnacle of his calculated cruelty. He had not just allowed me to sacrifice myself. He had times chosen, times me as the sacrificial lamb, knowing full well his mistress could have stepped up, but had refused. He had used my love, my devotion, my very body, as a disposable resource, a convenient solution to his problem, all while planning his future with the woman who deemed him less important than a scar. My initial shock gave way to a cold, burning emptiness. A void where any lingering shred of love, pity, or even recognition for the man I once knew had existed. He was a monster, a predator, stripping me bare not just of my dignity, but of a piece of my physical self. All for his own selfish preservation and calculated agenda. The whispered endearments, the praise for my selflessness, the promises of forever, they were all a meticulously crafted performance, designed to lull me into a false sense of security, to ensure I would be the one to give him life while he stole mine. He had deliberately sent me to the operating table, knowing he had another option, knowing he was already betraying me with the woman who refused to make the same sacrifice. A profound shift occurred within me at that moment. The grief, the anger, even the despair, they all congealed into something harder, colder, more absolute. It wasn't enough for him to simply face legal consequences. It wasn't enough for his reputation to be ruined. My resolve, hardened by every past blow, now became an unyielding force, a promise whispered to the ravaged core of my being. Justice, for Cyrus Simon, would not just be legal, it would be absolute, it would be personal. And he would pay for every agonizing breath I had taken on that operating table, for every tear Harmony had shed, For every shattered piece of the woman he had tried to destroy, I would ensure he regretted the day he decided to use my body as his personal life support, only to discard me for a younger, more aesthetically pleasing alternative. This time, there would be no mercy. That chilling revelation, the apex of his calculated cruelty, extinguished any remaining flicker of my past self. The Amanda who once loved Cyrus, who believed in his goodness, was dead, replaced by a woman sculpted by betrayal and fueled by a righteous, unyielding demand for justice. Reed, observing the cold fire in my eyes, understood. We wasted no time. The civil lawsuits, meticulously crafted for fraud and the intentional infliction of emotional distress, were not just legal documents. They were declarations of war, designed to systematically expose every last thread of their monstrous scheme. The legal offensive commenced with a series of public depositions, a stage where Cyrus, Heather, Catherine, and Murphy were compelled to testify under oath. The hushed courtroom, usually a bastion of legal formality, became a theater of raw, unvarnished truth. Under Reed's relentless surgical questioning, their carefully constructed narratives began to unravel. Cyrus, stripped of his usual composure, stammered and contradicted himself, his eyes darting, revealing the cowardice beneath the veneer of his past arrogance. Heather, pale and visibly shaken, tried to maintain an air of injured innocence, but her evasiveness and inconsistent answers only served to highlight her complicity. Catherine, once so imperious, struggled to reconcile her aristocratic pride with the tawdry reality of her son's crimes and her own involvement, her lies crumbling under pressure. Even Murphy, the silent enabler, found his terse, guarded responses picked apart, revealing his passive support of the deceit. Every lie, every machination, every insidious detail of their conspiracy was dragged into the harsh light of day, not just for the judge and jury, but for the hungry eyes of the media. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras flashed discreetly outside the courthouse, and the public, already invested in my story, devoured every scandalous revelation. Meanwhile, the net around Stuart Thorne, Heather's father and the architect of much of the financial malfeasance, tightened irrevocably. Detective Torres's ongoing investigation had unearthed an empire of illicit land deals, money laundering, and bribery. Far more extensive and ruthless than initially conceived, the evidence was irrefutable. A mountain of illicit transactions and witness testimonies that painted him as a kingpin of corruption. The criminal trial that followed was swift and decisive. Stuart Thorne, once a powerful and untouchable figure, was convicted on multiple counts, receiving a life sentence that left his family and what remained of his tarnished legacy in ruins. Dr. Fisher, the disgraced psychologist who had fabricated the reports against me, also faced his reckoning. His arrest had provided a crucial link in Torres's investigation, and his subsequent trial for perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud resulted in a just if not entirely satisfying 10-year sentence. The thought of him, stripped of his professional standing and imprisoned for his malicious falsehoods, brought a grim sense of vindication. The confluence of these legal victories was overwhelming. The initial public sympathy I had garnered had now transformed into a collective cry for justice, amplified by every damning headline and every shocking testimony. The Simon family name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was utterly decimated. Their reputation shattered beyond repair. Their wealth, built on layers of deceit, was now being systematically unraveled by the civil courts, destined to be used to compensate me for the intentional infliction of emotional distress and the monumental fraud they had perpetrated. Every step forward, every legal triumph, resonated not just as a personal victory, but as a powerful statement that even the most privileged and cunning could not escape the consequences of their actions, especially when those actions targeted an innocent life and a mother's sacred bond with her child. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the shattered remnants of his reputation, Cyrus Simon received a surprisingly lenient sentence for his role in the sprawling conspiracy. His cooperation against Stuart Thorne whose criminal enterprise was far grander and more deeply entrenched, earned him a plea deal. 3 years in a minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of witness protection. It felt like a mere slap on the wrist for the magnitude of his betrayal. A stark contrast to Stewart's life sentence or Dr. Fisher's decade behind bars. Yet, for me, it offered a different kind of justice. A quiet, almost poetic retribution that no courtroom could ever truly legislate. His freedom, however brief, was a mirage. Even within the confines of his new reality, the consequences of his choices began to manifest with brutal, biological precision. Reports, trickling through Reed's office from various channels, confirmed that Cyrus's remaining kidney, already weakened by his chronic disease, was rapidly deteriorating. The very organ I had saved, then refused to replace, was now failing him completely. His once vibrant facade, built on deceit and ambition, was peeling away, revealing a man increasingly frail, dependent on dialysis, fading within the sterile walls of the prison infirmary. There was no public spectacle, no dramatic downfall, just a slow, agonizing decline, a quiet unraveling of his physical self, mirroring the ruin of his moral core. Then came the plea, delivered not quietly in the chambers of a lawyer, but blared across every media outlet, a desperate public spectacle orchestrated by Catherine and Murphy Simon. With their empire crumbling, their reputation in tatters, and their son facing imminent death, they turned to me, the woman they had scorned, the wife they had tried to destroy. Their voices, once laced with disdain, now quavered with a calculated despair, begging me to donate my second times kidney to save Cyrus. They spoke of forgiveness, of redemption, of the sanctity of family, their words a hollow mockery of everything they had done. They even offered financial compensation, a grotesque insult, assuming my heart could be bought or swayed by the very currency they had used to orchestrate their treachery. The sheer audacity of their request, after everything, was breathtaking. My refusal was swift, unequivocal, and delivered with a clarity born of absolute certainty. Reed advised caution, warning of potential public backlash from those who might view my decision as heartless. But I knew my truth. I called a press conference, a rare public appearance, my voice steady, devoid of anger or bitterness. Only a cold, resolved truth. I once gave Cyrus Simon a part of myself, believing I was saving the man I loved, the father of my child, I stated, looking directly into the sea of cameras. He knew then that his mistress, a compatible donor, had refused to do the same, citing cosmetic reasons. Yet, he allowed me to undergo a life-altering surgery, to sacrifice my health, while simultaneously plotting to divorce me, steal my daughter, and destroy my life with fabricated evidence. His choices were not simply acts of betrayal. They were acts of calculated cruelty, designed to exploit my love and sacrifice for his own selfish gain. My first kidney was a gift of love, shamefully desecrated. My second kidney, I continued, my voice hardening, is not his to claim. I will not be a pawn in his game again. Justice, in this instance, is not mine to administer, but for Cyrus Simon to face, alone, the consequences of his own monstrous actions. The public reaction was divided. As Reed had predicted, some condemned me, calling me vengeful, cruel, but the majority, remembering the full, ugly scope of Cyrus's crimes, stood in solidarity. They understood. They saw not a heartless woman, but a survivor, finally reclaiming her autonomy, her body, her very essence from a man who had sought to consume it all. And so, Cyrus Simon died alone in prison, not with his family by his side, but in the sterile quiet of a hospital ward, tethered to machines that ultimately failed him. His life, once a testament to ambition and deceptive charm, became a stark monument to his own destructive choices. His legacy, once one of wealth and respectability, was now one of shame, a cautionary tale whispered in the hallowed halls he once frequented. There was no grand funeral, no eulogies praising his character, only the silent, somber closing of a chapter, leaving behind a hollow echo where a life and a family once stood. Cyrus's final breath marked not an ending, but a new, quiet beginning for us, though for the others, it was merely the bitter harvest of their own sowing. Heather Stewart, once so poised and ambitious, vanished from public life, her name irrevocably linked to bigamy, fraud, and a callous disregard for human life. The real estate firm that had once proudly displayed her polished photographs now scrubbed them from their website, severing all ties. Her modeling aspirations, those vain concerns she'd prioritized over Cyrus's survival, became a cruel irony whispered behind closed doors. Her social media, once a curated showcase of success, lay dormant, a digital graveyard of a meticulously crafted but utterly fake persona. Her reputation, once her most prized possession, was not merely tarnished but irrevocably shattered, a mosaic of public humiliation and professional ruin from which she would never recover. She was, as I had predicted, suffering the full, devastating consequences of her choices, a lonely figure discarded by the very world she had so desperately sought to conquer. The Simon family's fate was equally grim. Their grand estate, once a symbol of unshakable power, was slowly devoured by legal fees and civil judgments. Their various businesses, now tainted by the stench of scandal and Stuart Thorne's criminal ties, hemorrhaged clients and capital, inexorably spiraling into bankruptcy. The whispers in those hallowed halls Cyrus once frequented had turned into shouts of disgrace, their once impeccable names synonymous with deceit and moral decay. Catherine and Murphy, once so imperious, retreated behind the locked gates of their crumbling empire. Financially ruined and socially ostracized, left to face a future stripped bare of the prestige they had so ruthlessly clung to. But while their world imploded, mine, slowly, deliberately, began to mend. The silence in our Willowbrook home, once a haunting echo of absence, gradually filled with Harmony's laughter, with the gentle rhythm of our days. My own healing was a journey, not a destination. There were still moments, quiet and unexpected, when a phantom ache would prick at the place where my kidney once resided, or a memory of betrayal would flash unbidden. But these were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the boundless joy of Harmony's presence and the fierce protective love that had carried me through the darkest times. We began to rebuild, brick by emotional brick, a new life untainted by their shadows, a sanctuary of genuine love and unwavering trust. We painted Harmony's room a cheerful yellow, planted new flowers in the garden, and spent countless evenings reading by the fireplace, her small hand nestled in mine, her innocence a balm to my weary soul. We rediscovered the simple, profound beauty of a life lived authentically, honestly. This new life wasn't perfect in the glittering, superficial way Cyrus had once defined it. It was real, messy, and deeply meaningful. It taught me that love, true love, isn't about sacrifice for the sake of adoration, but about protecting what is sacred, even when it means facing down the monsters you once called family. My journey, from a naive wife to a fierce protector, revealed the extraordinary strength that lay dormant within me, the unwavering will of a mother to defend her child and demand justice. I had lost a part of myself, physically and emotionally, but in its place, I had found an unbreakable spirit, a deep sense of peace, and a profound, empowering understanding of who Amanda Collins truly was. We were free, and in that freedom, we found our truest, most enduring strength.